The United States has some of the most best-known professional sports teams in the world, and yet I would imagine that the men's national soccer team is not one of the first ones that comes to your mind. The U.S. men's national team has faltered in the past few years in gaining prestige not only in sports teams here in the United States, but also in the soccer community around the world. With the team missing qualification and never even playing in the 2018 FIFA World Cup held in Russia, we are left to wonder where they need to improve. Some might blame the coach for untactful strategies and for positioning young, inexperienced players, while players like Tim Howard, Landon Donovan, Clint Dempsey, and even Michael Bradley have all passed their prime or have retired. These top-notch U.S. soccer players were some of the best in the past decade, but our team could not rely on its past. Hi, I'm Leo Mendez, a 12th grade Bullock County 4-H'er, and as a goalkeeper in a player development program in the United States who has traveled to Europe and to South America, or Central America, I've seen firsthand this difference in player development. My team was made up of the best Olympic development team players in the southeast region of the country. My view is that the biggest reason for the gap in U.S. men's play versus other countries is that there is no proper strategy for the development of the current and upcoming U.S. men's national team players. This can be blamed for the inadequate mentality of soccer culture, the lack of a defined top league, and the desire to make too much money and business. Because after all, we certainly have as many, if not more resources than any other country to make the most elite athletes in the world. Parents of young children interested in playing sports have many factors to consider when choosing the right sport for their child. In many countries where soccer is considered the national sport, the youth development of these players is a no-brainer. In many European countries, the competitive development of these youth players begins at the age of 4 or 5, whereas in the U.S., 4 or 5-year-olds are just being introduced to the sport, as a recreational activity with very little focus or skill needed. Our delayed attention to true skill development puts youth in the U.S. behind those from other countries even at a young age. A 9 or 10-year-old in the U.S. may begin to start focusing on their skill development, whereas a 9 or 10-year-old in Europe may already be learning the true meaning and strategy of the game. Many players in the U.S. have a shorter window of time to begin developing their soccer IQ compared to those in other countries that have been focusing on soccer for many more years. Foundationally, only a few youth soccer players in the United States ever achieve the highest level of play, while others are left behind. In Europe, it is very common for most elite soccer players to go professional at the age of 16, whereas in the U.S., some can enter the MLS soccer draft until after college. In the U.S., most elite soccer players will go on to play collegiate soccer before getting their first glimpse of professional soccer. Another major difference between U.S. soccer and international soccer is the role the game plays within the national culture. In the U.S., we will consider football, baseball, and basketball to be some of America's sports. But in other countries, soccer is king. In terms of viewership, the World Cup has more viewers than the Super Bowl. For instance, when Germany beat Argentina in the 2015 World Cup, there were over 1 billion people tuned in to watch that match. Whereas in the 2015 Super Bowl, it only had a TV viewership of only 160 million. This goes to show the emphasis that the countries place on watching their national sport. In the U.S., much of the general public lacks knowledge of the game. Often when watching a soccer game in the United States, those in the crowd cheer only for the goals that are scored or defended, and it is treated more for entertainment. In many European countries, those in the audience know the game and have much experience with it as well, as they are dissecting the techniques and get excited when the productive series of passes are completed in order to score a scoring opportunity. This attention to detail shows the passion and desire that those in the other countries have to see their teams do well. When it comes down to it, the players that make it to the highest level in any sports are those that are willing to make the sacrifices. At the youth level, players will usually compete in their local clubs, and some are content with that, even if their team isn't the strongest. Personally, I have had to make many long travel in order to compete at the highest level. I am with a team in Peachtree City, Georgia, and that is roughly a 3-hour-and-a-half drive for us just to get there. Whereas some players are even willing to sacrifice moving cities to compete at the highest level. The strongest teams are always those that are willing to make the most sacrifices and able to sacrifice their body, time, and energy to reach their goals. Strategy for player development in the United States is very different from Europe. Our cultural sports norm is to focus on the development of the star athlete, and it's because of our inherent desire to win. Oftentimes, we only encourage those elite athletes to master their skill set. Whereas in other countries, a player with a weakness in his game will be given a challenge to improve and not give up. Player development is treated very differently in other countries due to a tiered approach. For example, a coach may bring a player that is physically not as developed as they are for their age group, and they might bring them down in age group. Instead, like I said, they'll move them down, and that way they have a fair playing condition. Now, instead of being physically overpowered, they can now compete at a more technical and more balanced environment. This way, the player can advance his game at his pace and eventually speed up to return their own age group. On the contrary, if a player is shown to be more advanced, they will sometimes bring them up in age group. That way, they can advance even quicker and that way develop more. Now, the type of a top soccer league in the U.S. We have too many mediocre leagues that invite parents, coaches, or directors in disagreement with their clubs or leagues to create another club or competition. However, the only valid reason to create multiple leagues is to shorten the long distance travel between clubs and families due to the size of the United States. On the other hand, this can lead to dispersion of talent and less competition. Ideally, all soccer clubs should be under one league to create one top strong level, with multiple levels beneath it. In the U.S., 3 associations used to control 3 different competitions: the United States Soccer Federation, U.S. Youth Soccer, and U.S. Club Soccer. This not only leads to too many competitions, but it allows scattered player potential because of the undefined top level of play. The United States Soccer Federation claimed to have the highest level of soccer, which were known as development academies. But the reality is that some players had the skill set to compete and were either not identified or they were content with playing with the level they were at already. However, the United States Soccer Federation has canceled the development academy teams because of insufficient funding, and now many teams are left to wonder where they're going to place these players that are at this high level. In comparison to England, the Football Association has more control over the development of all players in that country. There are categories 1 through 4, with category 1 usually being the most funded and most competitive. Having a smaller country has its perks, as there is less travel and closer competition. This provides the advantage of creating the FA for the whole country. These past 2 years, I have tried out for the Olympic Development Program, that is with the USU Soccer. I was selected for the Georgia State team and trained at least once a month at the Atlanta United training facilities. Because of my skill, I was chosen for the Southeast Region team that traveled to Barcelona, Spain in 2019 and Costa Rica for 2020. While I'm part of an elite USU soccer development team, playing against teams of second level in Spain and first level in Costa Rica proved to be much of a challenge for us, and it showed us the gaps that exist in training and the player development between the 3 countries. Another downfall is the business aspect of the sport. In the U.S., club soccer can be very expensive and can range roughly from $400 up to $1,750 just per season. And this doesn't even include the fees for kits, travel, tournaments, or referees. Some soccer clubs offer scholarships for those that need financial aid. However, it is sometimes not enough for families to continue supporting their child in soccer. These expenses are massive because of a lack of funding from soccer associations here in the U.S. On the contrary, England, for example, has the Football Association that controls the Football League and the Premier League, as they have much funding for the programs. Families are hardly ever charged for the participating, and they may only need to pay for the kits. In Europe, soccer development is more about who has the skill set more than who has the money to pay. In the U.S., funding for soccer is insufficient to support families and consequently for the player development. As you can see, in the United States, the top 5 men's soccer teams generate roughly from $395 to $500 million in annual revenue. Whereas in the top 5 teams in Europe, they generate roughly $2.69 up to $4 billion in annual revenue. This goes to show that European countries are willing to invest more into the player development and have the cultural support to create these top teams in the world. My hope is that the U.S. will adopt some of the player development practices that have been in place in Europe for decades. By adopting these practices, the U.S. men's national team will not only stand out amongst professional sport teams here, but also be able to compete very well against other teams in other countries. In conclusion, the U.S. soccer mentality and culture, player development, and creating one league could provide an order in the competition and the level of play. Also, concentrating on the aspect of player development instead of making the sport a business could help into focusing on the matter at hand and success.